Hello, everybody. Ahlo sahla fikun. I'm Julia Diana Ghassan Robertson here with Ellen Broidy, one of four founders of what we now know as the Pride Parade, along with Craig Rodwell, Fred Sargent, and Linda Rhodes. And hi,
Good afternoon.
good afternoon. Fred asked me to get in touch with you because he felt that for so many years, he was asked to give interviews about being one of the founders of Pride. And he'd say, well, could you try and reach out to, the lesbian counterparts here? Because he was concerned about things like lesbian erasure, historical revisionism, credit always kind of being given to men. And he described you as the real deal, quote unquote, the real deal. And when I spoke to him, he was like, I was just a kid. I was 19 years old at the time. And, she really was, she knew what she was doing. She was go, 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 get it done. And so here we are with you. Have you had a lot of people interview you about this?
Oh yeah, I feel like I've said this to somebody a couple of days ago that I feel like a bear that hibernates all winter and then June comes, Pride Month comes, and everybody's lined up in front of my den. So I emerge and have done a number of interviews starting roughly in 2018 and going through to this year.
That's good. So you have been interviewed, and that's good to hear
Oh yeah,
because a lot.
there was an excellent documentary by a French documentarian named Mathilde Fessin, who it's called Stonewall. I'm in it. Uh, Carla Jay is in it. Perry Brass. It's about a 2 hour long documentary, and it's really one of the best productions that I've seen. She's an excellent filmmaker.
I'm gonna have to watch that tonight. Is
Oh,
it on? Where is it that I
no,
can?
I can. It was for French public television, but I can send you the link.
That would be awesome.
She did it in 2019. We did the interviews, all of us did the interviews before the 2019 March, where the Gay Liberation Front was Grand Marshal. But there's also footage from the march there as well. So you'll see us waving at her
Oh,
from.
cool. I'll get the popcorn ready for later.
No, it's very professionally done. And it said it was, she did it under contract with the French public television station.
Oh, cool. Is Fred
So
in?
it never showed in this country,
Oh, it didn't.
but it is, the copy I have is in English.
Oh, great. Cool. I can't wait to see that.
So
Uh,
try and remember to send it to you.
if you don't remember, I'll remind you.
Okay, that would be helpful.
So
So,
tell me
I have,
about that time period. I know that Stonewall happened. You were on Fire Island.
mhm.
As soon as you got back, you got right into action and founded this first ever Pride March, which has evolved into something completely different nowadays than it was back then when it was about getting the rights. It was about protest, and now it's kind of very corporate, very sponsored.
Yeah, it was as I've said in other presentations, we were convinced that this was going to be the start of a radical political movement. We were absolutely convinced we were going to turn the world around. And here we are in 2021, and it's kind of hard to believe where we're not yet.
Yeah,
Um, it was it was just a different time. It was the nascent gay liberation movement, Black Power, the civil rights movement, the women's movement. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of ferment and foment to tie into and to take lessons from, both positively and negatively.
yeah. Where do you feel like we're falling short, that we
Oh,
haven't quite got to where we wanted to initially get to?
well, I can answer that in one name, Mitch McConnell. You know, look at who's basically running this country. We had 4 years of Donald Trump. So, clearly the I mean, my view is the regressive side of politics has no issues to run on except the culture war.
Hmm.
When they run on the culture war, it
Right.
starts us.
And we keep putting our faith in leaders when we should really be kind of evolving out of putting all of our faith into these leaders to save us.
Yeah,
Um,
they're not going to save us, but we still, you know, as distressing as it's been for many of us, still believe in a democracy. And, you know, a democracy requires, I guess, leaders. We just happen to have a piss poor set of them.
right, right, that's true.
I mean, what I'm finding extremely amusing from 3,000 miles away is the mayoral election in New York. Is there anybody who isn't running? I mean, it's just wild. You know, I live in a small city where, you know everybody. But
Mhm.
looking at New York, I love it. It's theater for me. I'm sure it's not theater for those of you who are stuck in the middle of it, but for
Well,
those of
my
us
wife and I live out in the woods, so we're
where,
far away from, we just stay as far away from all that as possible. We live like an hour outside of the city, so I like to
oh,
say we
see,
live in the woods.
mhm.
So tell me about that period of time um, in your life when you were, friends with Craig Rodwell, and then you met Fred. You were dating Linda Rhodes, if I'm right. I'm not.
We lived together. I was a student at NYU. Linda was working. Linda's an architect. She's now retired, but she was an architect at that point. And you probably know the original Oscar Wilde bookstore was on Mercer Street,
Mhm.
right in the middle of the NYU campus. And I would walk past sort of whatever this was going to happen, whatever it was going to be, um, every day on the way to and from school. And finally, just soon after it opened, maybe actually before it opened, I walked in and said, "What's this? What can I do?" And from that point forward, I spent most afternoons after school at the bookstore. Linda would leave work, come meet me at the bookstore. We were sort of unpaid staff. We'd work the register, talk to people. You'd be surprised the number of people coming in saying they were doing a psychology or sociology project. This was before Stonewall. This was 1967 or 68. It was kind of the dark ages.
Mhm.
So we became friends with Craig, and then at some point, I don't have the chronology in my mind clearly, but he and Fred got together, and I was the chair, president, I don't remember what we called it, of what was then called the NYU Student Homophile League. Thankfully, we changed the name, and I can tell you a funny story about what made us change the name. But as an officer of that group, I was a delegate, in quotes, to the Eastern Regional Conference of Homophile Organizations, ERCO, which was meeting in Philadelphia. It was November 1969. What Stonewall was the end of June 69. So this was November, June, July, August, September, October, roughly 5 months later.
Mhm.
And the simple story is the night before we were to go to Philadelphia, Linda, Fred, Craig, and I had dinner together, which we did quite frequently. And the conversation, of course, turned to what was going on in the homophile movement or the gay rights movement at that point. And we started talking about ERCO and Stonewall and how to bring these two things together, how to change the, well, let me step back. You probably know this history that for several years prior to Stonewall, there was a demonstration on July 4th.
Mhm.
Started initially in front of the White House, but then they changed the venue to Independence Hall.
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, Philadelphia. And these were mostly folks, Barbara Giddings, Frank Kameny, Kay Tobin, Foster Gunnison, who held this demonstration to not so much demand as request that the federal government treat gay men and lesbians with some modicum of respect, meaning they didn't fire them for being
Right.
lesbians and gay men. But it
Right.
was a very, very formal demonstration. The men were in suits and ties, the women were in skirts or dresses. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was respectable to
Right.
the max. So, talking about that, talking about Stonewall, talking about a demonstration that Martha Shelley, my GLF sister, Martha Shelley, had organized immediately after Stonewall, which got maybe 200 or 300 people. We're thinking about how can we build on that? How can we build something that was progressive, that was large, that would catch on? And we came up with what we at that point called the Christopher Street Liberation Day March.
I
And we,
I love Martha Shelley. We also did a Zoom meeting, and I love her history. I know she's Jewish. She was also just a go-getter. She just wanted to help this evolve, help create this movement.
yeah,
And
definitely.
I could just talk to her for hours and hours.
Mm-hmm.
We both said that when we Zoomed. We were like, I could just keep talking to you for so long. She's just incredible. So you worked with her as well?
No, no,
No.
no.
Okay.
This she. I knew about what she had done,
Okay.
and we were in GLF by that point. So of course I knew her through that.
GL,
But
for anybody who doesn't know, is Gay Liberation
the
Front.
Gay Liberation Front, yes, which had a short but glorious life. Um, so we wrote this statement, which I think you actually reproduced in the article that you, when you interviewed Fred, I think initially, and he was talking about me. We wrote a statement and then spent some time talking about how best to present the statement. And Craig was, I mean, I've used this expression before, Craig was a bit of a lightning rod. People either adored him or abhorred him.
Mm-hmm.
So, talking this through, it made more sense for one of the others of us to present the statement so we wouldn't have a situation where people would listen, would react to the messenger and not to the
Right.
message.
Right.
So, since I had the quote unquote official position as the president of the NYU Student Homophile League, we decided that I would do it. So we get to Philadelphia, rainy, cold. That's why I live in Santa Barbara. Rainy, cold, you know, November morning. I think it was upstairs in a bookstore, a meeting room that was on the second floor of a bookstore. And I remember absolutely nothing about that meeting other than my tiny part in it, which was to stand up and make this proposal. And to my absolute glee and somewhat astonishment, it was approved with one abstention. All of the groups at the Eastern Regional Conference of Homophile Organizations said, yeah, go for it. New York Mattachine abstained.
Right. This was a big point of contention with Fred as well.
Well, I think that had, again, a lot to do with Craig as the messenger
Right.
and uh, his hot and cold relationship with people like Dick Leitch and Randy Wicker. I mean, people he'd worked with on gay actions for years. I mean, they did the action at Julius's bar together. Craig was was central to New York Mattachine, but New York Mattachine was a reformist and accommodationist organization, at least from my 23-year-old vantage point, because when you're 23, you think you know everything.
You really do think you know everything when
You
you're
really do think
23.
you know everything,
It's like, yeah, it's so
you
true.
know, and after almost 40 years of teaching kids who are not quite 23 years old, I'm convinced they think they know everything. But saying that, I have to actually acknowledge my own culpability in this knowing everything, because I was quite dismissive of the actions of the Daughters of Bilitis and Mattachine of this July 4th. I'm doing this because they walked in a circle.
Oh, I see. Okay.
This is a premium for people who are hard of hearing. Like I, and they
Right.
walked in a circle, and I was quite dismissive
Yeah.
of it. And in part, some of my fervor, some of my desire to be active and to do something was reactive. Not so much reacting against straight society, that was a given, but reacting against the kinds of activities that people were doing, what I saw as in my name. Again, the
Right.
reformist accommodationist. So we wanted to do something different.
Right. And that's the way a lot of movements get started is reactively. We
Mm-hmm.
will see something going on and our movement will become a reaction to, well, we don't really like what's going on here. So now we're going to start from the ground up and rebuild and,
Mm-hmm.
and start our own kind of grassroots movement that reflects better what we feel it should.
But
Um,
I think as the year went on, between November and June, much of that fell away, this sort of reactive stance, and it really became a something that needed to sort of stand on its own feet. Our politics needed to stand on their own. And it can't be we're doing this because we haven't liked what others have done before us. But it's only now, I was 23 then, I'm 75 now, that I've come to, number one, be able to admit this, and number two, understand much more clearly the shoulders we stood upon. If
right.
they had walked around in front of the White House or Independence Hall, who knows where we'd be now.
Right. Right.
So I owe them both an apology and a debt of gratitude.
It's amazing how, with so much time and self reflection, we can come to see those sorts of things that seem so obvious sometimes when we get a little older. And at the time, maybe we just don't see it.
No.
We just kind of evolve and elevate, maybe get in touch with the higher self a little bit better. And we get a much bigger, broader picture. It's almost like we zoom out and get a broader picture of the world that we're in and how we're all connected, how we all are working together as a whole, even when we
But
don't realize it.
as with any political movement, we weren't all working together. And there were people from Mattachine and Daughters of Bilitis who looked upon us as, who are these scruffy commie kids? It was almost like the McCarthy
Were you
era,
scruffy?
pinko commie queers, and that's who we were. Except we didn't use the word queer. But yeah, so it's been a relief to me after these many years to let go of, to admit who I was at that point and to let go of some of it.
Right,
Not, not all.
right. And,
Because it was interesting. I was on Fire Island the night of Stonewall, and Linda and I were in a share in a house with four other women, one of whom was Barbara Giddings, who was probably the prime mover with Frank Kameny of this Independence Hall demonstration. So that house was, we talked a lot about these sorts of issues, never kind of came down on the same side of it. And it may have been an age thing at that point. I mean, Barbara, I mean, she might have been 30,
Hmm.
so to a 23-year-old, that was, that was kind of a bridge too far.
Right. And so you were there. Stonewall happened, and Fred kind of walked past Stonewall at the time. He saw all the stuff going down with you know, everything kind of breaking out, and this was kind of the catalyst for what you guys did to start this Pride March. Do you know about what happened at Stonewall? What did
Yeah.
you hear? What did you hear when you got back? What
Well, it wasn't just what I heard when I got back. We didn't have the internet and texting and all like that, but we had telephones, and word. Remember, we were on Fire Island. Fire Island had two predominantly gay communities: the Pines and Cherry Grove. Our house was in Cherry Grove. No, sorry, our house was in the Pines, not Cherry Grove. But those two communities were absolutely abuzz with the information. People calling and saying, "You're not going to believe what happened."
wow.
And the ferry, Ferry, not Fairy, the ferry on Monday morning from Fire Island back to the mainland, or actually back to Long Island, we took the bus into the city, was called the Bucket of Blood because everybody was so hungover. I mean, it was a, but that morning, that Monday after Stonewall, I sensed a palpable difference amongst this group of people on this boat who were not, these weren't political people. I mean, you didn't go to Fire Island to do politics.
Right.
You went to
Not
Fire
from
Island
what
to
I've
do,
heard.
anything but.
Right.
But there was something about the energy that I remember to this day. It just felt different. Some corner had been turned that hadn't been turned at Clifton's cafeteria, that hadn't been turned in at the Black Cat, that hadn't been turned at Independence Hall. Something had happened that people were just, their mouths were hanging open.
Big energy shift. I got chills when you said that
It
everywhere.
was. It
You can
was
almost feel it as you're saying it, that
yeah.
energy shift.
So
Wow.
we came back. This is sort of the beginning of July, and started to get involved around the bookstore, doing things at the bookstore, but also, and I'm not remembering the exact sequence of events when Linda and I finally ended up at GLF, but it was early. It was early in the history of GLF, and because it was the summer, uh, school was basically not in session. So the student group at NYU wasn't meeting. So the bookstore and GLF, which at that point was meeting at some place called Alternate U. You know about Alternate U?
No, I don't think I do. I'm knowing most of what you're saying, like GLF, but I haven't heard that one.
Well, Alternate U was on 14th Street and 6th Avenue in a loft building. And it was kind of the headquarters of radical New York politics, young radical New York politics. And that's where GLF met. And I remember going to our first meeting that we ever went to was at Alternate U. And then GLF got big enough to need a different space and started to meet at Church of the Holy Apostles, which is in Chelsea on like 24th and 9th. But it did get its start at at Alternate U, and we held dances there as well. It was a weird space. Funniest thing about Alternate U is they really on a shoestring. This is a complete digression. Really on a shoestring budget, but they knew that they had a lot of stuff that needed to be destroyed once it was lived out its usefulness. So they had a large cage that had a mouse in it, and the mouse was named Chairman Mouse after Chairman Mao, and that was the shredder. You just put papers you didn't want in, and
Oh,
Chairman Mouse
wow.
would shred the papers for you.
Because there was so much that was illegal back then, like, the clothing that you wore, you had to have on at least 3 pieces of feminine clothing
Well, it
or,
also depended on where you were. That
right,
kicked in if they raided a bar. I went to school in jeans, flannel shirts, work boots, you know, and a bra. So I had one piece of
typical dyke attire.
yeah, typical, and nobody batted an eye. Had
Right,
I been caught in a bar raid, that would have been a different story.
right. And that's something that's mind blowing, especially for like people like me and my wife to know that like we would be in a lot of trouble if we lived in a different time period.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and especially my wife. I mean, I'll also do the flannels and the jeans and this and that and the other thing, but I think I'd be fine. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think when you combine that with, oh God forbid, short hair, because
Yeah.
we all gotta have long hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes like it was a dangerous thing when
Well, it was. It was. I mean, and I think uh, there was danger, but we had a lot of pride in it, and it was energizing to be an outlaw.
yeah,
And I think that was a motivating factor.
yeah,
As you know, we've said that. I mean, I've often described the mainstream homophile organizations as wanting a piece of the pie. Reasonable enough request. I see GLF and some of what's come after GLF as wanting to blow up the whole bakery. The hell with this piece of a pie. The entire recipe needs to be redone.
right.
And that's the revolution we had hoped would get started.
I feel like the politics have gotten a little bit nowadays, now that we've expanded to include like so many letters in the alphabet, sometimes
And
twice.
Martha used to refer to it as LGBT LMNOP.
Right. It's become an alphabet soup. I feel like it's really made it a very different movement from what was started with one intention and now has evolved into something completely almost unrecognizable, even to someone like me who wasn't around during the Stonewall period of time, but certainly grew up during a time period where it wasn't a whole big soup going on. What's that been like for you, particularly seeing revisionism happen, like Storm being rewritten as he and him, and like people trying to really get that to stick? Meanwhile, there's plenty of people like me who have connections there, um, saying, "Oh, well, that's not even remotely the case. Like, why are you revising our sheroes and trying to make them heroes? Like, what's really going on here? And how is this helping anybody to erase our history and to change our history and to so drastically alter it?" You almost get this sense as a lesbian of, what are they going to say about me?
Well, a couple of things immediately come to mind. In fact, there are a group of, I call them survivors, people from GLF who are trying very, very hard to correct the historical record. And in two newspapers in the past 48 hours, there have been articles that talk about Brenda Howard as the mother of pride. Brenda was a fine woman. She brought the issue of bisexuality, to our attention, but in no way did she do what she's credited with doing. So in fact, we just finished signing off on a letter today to two of these newspapers. We had a fight last year with the New York Times about it, where they refused to change their story, but then printed a correction the next week. So this has been an ongoing struggle for us. And the story of, who threw the first brick at Stonewall. There were no bricks
Right.
at Stonewall. The other thing that really set me off, and I swear, or at least I try not to be transphobic. I honestly do. And this has nothing really to do with trans people, but to do with,
It never does. It never
my
does.
colleagues. But
Right.
2 years ago, one organization, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was, listed the 6 women to whom we owe the start of a progressive gay rights movement. Every one of them was a trans woman.
Isn't that
And this,
unbelievable?
and there are lots of us still around,
And even
still
just saying
alive.
that, people will say they'll throw the word transphobic out. Almost anything you say, including like at this point, like breastfeeding is transphobic, like everything's transphobic at the moment. Um, so it's kind of like you've got to correct the history.
Mm-hmm. And correcting the history can be done without any degree of any kind of phobia. You could
Right,
say simply, which is what we've been trying to do.
right.
This is what happened. This is when, where, how, and by whom.
And
And
I
it's
see it as homophobic. I view it as a homophobia, a movement of homophobia to erase and recreate the people that we should know about and that we should be celebrating. I find it very homophobic,
but it's
especially
being done. It's being done by our community.
right, which is no
These
longer
people who are writing these articles
right,
or creating these lists of the 6 most prominent women in the gay liberation movement. These aren't straight people.
right,
This is not coming out of Liberty University.
right.
This is coming out of our community.
And our
And
community now includes straight people who feel queer, so they identify with a slur.
see, I'm not quite sure
It includes just
what
about anybody.
anybody. Yeah.
So our community is absolutely everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got straight people. They do articles on straight people, and they're like, "Well, I'm queer,"
Yeah.
and I
Are you now?
I
Mm-hmm.
spoke to somebody recently who's a little bit older than me, and she was saying she just remembers that being like bashed with that, having it written on her car, her car window. And to her, it's like to hear young people even kind of using the word queer is like, oh, and that's something that once I understood it. And I was like, okay, so maybe we don't do that.
But
Um,
I'm not. I have no objection to sort of the rehabilitation of a word. My objection, if you can even call it that, is who has decided to apply that label to themselves.
right.
If it's applied to everybody, it's
Absolutely.
lost its meaning.
Exactly.
And it's lost its revolutionary intent. To take the word back
Mhm.
is a revolutionary action.
Right.
To spread it like margarine is not.
I couldn't have said that better myself. It's not reclaiming, you can't reclaim a slur that historically wouldn't have been used against you. That's not how reclaiming a slur works.
Yeah.
So it's not the issue isn't reclaiming the slur, it's more who has been reclaiming it that's offensive.
Yeah, and who has decided they have the privilege to call themselves that. It's one thing for a straight person to call themselves queer when all the evidence of their life says otherwise.
Right.
It's another for a lesbian or a gay man or a trans person to call themselves queer, where there is something tangible at stake or could be.
So
Safe.
when they print these like retractions or corrections, it's just not as impactful as the initial article that goes
Who
out.
reads them?
Right.
You read the corrections in the New York Times? I
Absolutely
don't
not. No.
know. And they did a much better article this year. And actually, they quoted me correctly this year, but the entire article was really about the kerfuffle around uniformed police officers. And I'm not absolutely sure. I mean, I agree with people who say the police have been horrible to us, throughout our history, our time on this planet. But there was a picture that accompanied the article, or maybe an earlier article, of the picture had 3 or 4 NYPD police women in uniform at the 2019 march. And they just looked so happy to be there that it broke my heart. That, we can't, unfortunately, look at people as individuals while the institution is corrupt.
Right.
So we're saying this institution, which has done us great harm, no, we don't want you. But these happy women in their uniforms who are proud to be both lesbian and police officers, well, we can't have you either with those 2 identities.
Yeah.
Make a choice. You can be a police officer and stand on the sidelines. You can be a lesbian and join the parade. So
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking. For something about that picture just did me in.
Yeah. I think pride nowadays for me is heartbreaking. The constant inching in of like these different variations of flags, and it feels like there's a lot of conflict, and you can see that conflict in everything. You could see it in so many ways, that there's so much going on. And I think when you put so many people under this one umbrella, including now straight people, there's going to be a lot of conflict, because you've got lesbians saying, well, I don't really want straight people telling my story. I don't want a person who feels queer rewriting our history. And pride for me is very painful now. I almost, like, when I pass by even just a rainbow flag, let alone one of these flags that's been like revised to include like everything, including now like a circle. I have like a bad reaction. I don't feel pride, and I get the sense that I'm not supposed to feel pride, because there's been so much animosity towards the lesbian community. There's been so much silencing of the lesbian community. There's been so much messing with our heads, messing with our youth, messing with young people who are coming up now, that I just feel a lot of sadness.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. And I was sort of reflecting on this past year's Black Lives Matter um, activities, and thinking back to, they don't need floats and corporate sponsorship to say what needs to be said. And that's how we started the Pride Parade. There were no floats. The signs were handmade. We had some banners, somebody kicked up for some money to have banners made, quote unquote, professionally. But we were just a bunch of, in many ways, scared kids on the street.
Right. Yeah,
And
kids aren't scared of anything anymore.
that's what gave it its power.
Well, that's not
Hey,
true.
that's what gave it
They are scared of stuff, but it's I don't think they have that same sense of fear that you guys had, where like you couldn't wear what you wanted to wear. It was still considered a psychological disorder, which is something I talked to Martha Shelley a lot about. And how did that sort of thing impact your sense of self, your perception of yourself, your feeling of yourself, and maybe even your feelings of other lesbians, having that like constantly drilled into you, this idea of like things being wrong, 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 wrong.
See, it wasn't drilled into me in that way. My parents were very progressive. Um,
In New
when I
York, you lived in New York?
I lived in Manhattan, yeah. When I agreed, this was well before Stonewall, to do a TV show on Channel 13, was that WNET, whatever whatever PBS is in New York. I agreed, again, NYU Student Homophile League, to do this show. There were four of us: Jack Nichols, Lige Clark, who since died, and one other woman, and for the life of me, I can't remember who it was. And I agreed to do the show. And then it dawned on me, my parents watched this show. Maybe I should tell at least one of them that, you know. So
Right.
I took
Otherwise, it'll just be like,
hello. Yeah, I called my mother and I said, can I take you to lunch? And I was living on a student wage. Take her to lunch. She got panic stricken that I was going to tell her something, that at the very least, that like I had 6 months to live. That don't tell her that. And we sit down in the restaurant across from her office. Every person in her agency must have come through that restaurant while we were sitting there. And I finally blurted it out. I don't know whether I said gay, homosexual, lesbian, or some mixture of all of them. And she looked across the table. You can see, I mean, the tension just went out of her face. She relaxed. She looked, she said, I've known since you were 4.
oh, wow.
I said, why didn't you tell me? She said, you figure it out by yourself and you didn't feel like it was any of my business.
How did she know since you were 4? Was there some indication or the usual stuff?
I was an unrepentant tomboy
Right.
forever and ever.
Right.
So,
And
but then,
parents can pick up on stuff like that.
yes,
Like I used to sit like this, and it drove, and as many times as I was corrected, there were so many things about me that, like, as many times as it was corrected, it was just like almost just innate
yeah,
to my being, and those things can be an indication
but
of that.
she was my mom. She knew me really well.
Right.
One thing she said was, you can't tell your father.
No, she said,
He won't be able to take it.
oh, wow.
I do the TV show. The next day after the show, my dad is at a business lunch, and somebody, not even a friend, just a work associate, comes over to him and said, I saw your daughter on TV last night, and opened up the whole thing. Just, you know, goodbye, Koa. We take care of dogs, and
Aw,
one of our charges, Koa, is who we love, is leaving. Goodbye, Koa.
hi,
Um,
Paw.
bye. She's a beautiful little girl. So I get home. Do you have a landline? You remember landline, telephone
Yeah, I don't
line?
have one, but my
Well,
wife's been wanting to get one for
we
like
lived, we
10
lived,
years now.
we lived in a fifth floor walk up, and I got home from school, and I was on the first floor, and I swear I could hear the phone angrily ringing in our apartment on the fifth floor. And it was my mother. Hi, Mom. She said, the shit's hit the fan, and she hung up.
And she hung up. That was it.
And that was it. What happened was my father was so furious that nobody trusted him with
Mm,
this information. It had nothing to do with my being a lesbian. That was fine. It
right.
was the lack of trust.
Yeah.
So from, well before Stonewall, well before the first Pride March. Sorry, the other dogs are barking now.
I like it. It gives ambiance. It gives ambiance, and it
Both my parents knew, and in fact, the morning of the first Pride March, my father called me and he said, "Here's our lawyer's phone number. Write it down in the palm of your hand, just in case," because they were scared for me,
yeah.
and I did. I wrote it down, and fortunately, never had to call.
Wow. And what background is your family, if I might ask?
They're Russian Jews.
Russian Jewish.
Mhm.
So there are a number of Jewish sheroes I've found, lesbian Jewish sheroes who made such a big impact, and that's really interesting. Uh,
Well, remember where we were. It was
mm,
New York City,
right,
and New York. New York has the largest population of Jews outside of Israel.
right.
So it's not going to be surprising. And in fact, many of us came out of very progressive households. We so that was not at all unusual. Had this happened in San Francisco or Chicago or St. Louis or something, you might have had a different demographic. But this was New York, and
Yeah.
that made a difference about who
It
we were.
makes me think about the history, and it also makes me think about the even further back history of Jewish people. And sometimes I wonder, like, how much of this kind of gets retained in our DNA, and from where we're from. I'm I've called myself a Jew rab before,
Mhm.
because I am on my mother's side. I have Jewish lineage, and my wife as well. And so I'm always very interested in different cultural backgrounds and seeing how parents respond from different cultural backgrounds. And so
But
that's
it
interesting.
was my parents' politics, not their Judaism or Jewishness that
Yeah.
made them accepting.
Do you think that being Jewish impacts the politics?
Well, I think it does, but
Yeah.
we see now with Jews moving to the right
Right.
is terrifying.
Yeah.
Don't they remember? You know,
Mhm.
do they have no memory of this? And
Right.
that's one of the problems. Historical memory is just shaky.
Short.
So historical, it's short term, it's shaky, and it's the perfect target for historical revisionism.
There's been lately like a scary amount of animosity towards Jewish people too.
Yes,
It's been very disturbing to watch that unfold again.
well, it's conflating the state of Israel with Jews, which would be like conflating Al Qaeda with Muslims.
Right, or like I grew up with a lot of people being like, "Oh, terrorist," or like saying a lot of stuff, and it's people can't separate that from each individual person. Like you were saying before with the cops, where you're a cop, okay, but you're also a lesbian, and you want to enjoy this Pride March, and is that uniform making people uncomfortable because of what it's associated with, because of what it's affiliated with? Who was it
But
that
again, I think with
like
the
you
police,
make the
with the
mistakes
police,
people
with the police, we have more evidence that this is a problematic
so much.
issue.
Yeah, I hate
So
to say it. I do have that feeling of fear around like calling the police. So recently we had an issue with our neighbor being very homophobic and really disturbing.
where do you live? You said an hour out of the city?
An hour out of the city in the woods, but that's as
Where?
detailed as I'll get. I'll tell you privately.
Oh, okay.
Um, but yeah,
Send
it's
me an email.
there is this sense of like, do you report things when they happen? And the answer is often no, because it's almost more threatening to have someone show up at your door And, we've had at one point in time a police push his way in,
Hmm.
refused to leave when we called for help about something, hand on the holster, voice getting really loud. I'm saying, okay, can you please leave now? And it is this sense of like, they take one look at me and my wife, and how do we know who's showing up? So there's like a lot of fear, I think,
Yeah.
around the police and even asking for help. So then you do have a situation where maybe you should report something and you just don't, because you're like, well, they're not only going to possibly more likely not believe what happened, but also how am I going to be treated? And, you
No,
know,
that's true.
gay
That's true.
people don't have a good history with the police. And there are good police out there, like
There
you
are, yeah.
said, just like there's
But
good in
but
every,
the institution, as I
right.
said, is extremely problematic.
Very, yeah, very much.
So
Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about before, or that you feel like any message to the lesbians that you want to?
no, I have no message to the
I'm
lesbians.
putting you on the spot here.
No, I have a message to younger people because it is your revolution now. It's your turn. But every now and again, as you're marching forward, turn around and wave back at us. We're still here. We're still important. Much the same ways that I needed to acknowledge the shoulders that I stood on, I would like others to acknowledge us. We did a lot of work,
Yeah,
and it wasn't easy. And a lot of it was extremely joyous, and some of it was extremely unpleasant.
you did a lot of work. You gave us pride. You
Well,
literally
we
went,
we
gave your speech, and got us our first pride. Got us the first, well, it wasn't called that at the time, but you got us that first march
well
in
with
1969, was it?
no,
70,
the first well, Martha's
70.
March was 69 in the summer of 69. The first Pride Parade was in 70. So in 2019, when we were Grand Marshals, that was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. 2020, 50th anniversary of the first Pride March.
Okay. And then, okay, one more question for you. Did you know Storm? And do you know
No,
anything about the story behind that?
no.
Because I'm just as a New Yorker, I'm connected to what's all that. I worked at Henrietta's, and the owner of Henrietta's was the her guardianship,
Mhm.
particularly towards the end of her life. So I've heard all the stories. I have some attachment to that history. I have I get annoyed when it gets rewritten because I'm like, no, I know these people. Like, what's going on? Like, enough of this. Uh,
No, I didn't know her, and part of the appeal of GLF and radical lesbians for me was it was a real alternative to the bar scene.
right.
So this was
It's dangerous. The bar
when
scene
I was
is dangerous.
when I was considerably younger.
Mhm.
I would go to places like the Sea Colony, and I have to confess, I was many of the women terrified me. I was too young to be there, too unaware of who I was, unaware of who they were. So
Right.
it was not a place. They were not places that I felt comfortable.
And
So
there was that element, that constant element of danger, somebody coming in and a raid and what could happen. And yeah,
I just remember Linda. There was a raid at Gianni's one night, and Linda screaming at me from across the bar, saying, "Don't get arrested. We have dogs. Yeah, don't get arrested. Who's going to take care of the dogs if you get arrested?"
right.
So we
Yeah,
didn't get arrested.
right. Good. I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah, I'm glad we didn't.
Because who would take care of the dogs?
Oh, exactly, exactly. It was a big problem.
It's a very reasonable concern. Also, just not getting arrested, because
It would be more of a
terrible
concern.
things can happen when you're arrested.
This is
I don't
true.
even like to think about it. Well, it's an absolute honor to have a chance to talk to you and to meet you.
I
I
appreciate
certainly
it.
consider you a shero, and last time I wrote about you, people just absolutely loved it. Um, and hopefully we'll get to talk again soon. I feel I could talk to you and keep talking to you, and
Okay, whatever. If there's anything
be
else, and
really great to
I
talk.
will try and remember to send you the documentary.
If you send it, I'll watch it
Okay.
tonight with popcorn.
With it has to have popcorn.
And I'm so excited. Like, I really want to see this because I don't feel like a lot of this information is available in the US. I mean, I really want to know more about lesbian history. And I find like when I'm looking for it, I really got to dig and dig and dig and look for it in places I wouldn't expect to, like, oh, a French documentary.
Mhm.
Um, and I want it to be more accessible. So hopefully we're doing that.
Have you ever spoken with Lillian Faderman?
I haven't.
She's probably the preeminent lesbian historian.
Okay.
Faderman.
You tell I'm writing.
And her first name is Lillian.
Okay.
She was a professor at Cal State Fresno for many, many years. She now lives in San Diego, but well, I'll send you all of this. But
Okay.
she's pretty amazing. It's pretty
I'll have
amazing.
to I'll have to set that up. And I like that message to lesbians. Don't forget who came before you. Don't forget to honor. I'm saying this. Don't forget to honor the people who came before you because it is a battle. It still is a battle
Mhm.
to protect the rights of gay and lesbian people, and it's ongoing. And it's not getting. It's easier in some regards, and in some regards, it's more complicated than ever to protect lesbian youth right
Mhm.
now.
I
And
don't so much, I just don't so much, the word honor doesn't resonate with me so much as acknowledge.
mhm,
You can acknowledge and then decide whether it's something worth honoring,
so
but
true,
it's definitely something worth acknowledging.
so true.
Uh,
Acknowledge and then decide.
yeah,
Uh,
decide which part of it, which one of us, which ones of us, whatever. But
right, you're one of
this,
the ones that I would choose to honor because I think that what you did was just absolutely incredible. The work you did is amazing, and it just even doing anything now to try to protect lesbian youth, it involves so much. You give up so much of yourself, so much of your own time, and in some cases you might even give up your own career, because right now it's that political to
fortunately, I'm retired, and most of my political energy now is going towards immigration work.
that's great. Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm here.
Mhm.
My dad's an immigrant, and that's
We're all
wonderful.
immigrants. This is a country
We
of
are.
immigrants.
That's so
Yeah.
true. So true.
Some
Well,
not by choice, but there you go. Okay, I will send you the link and I'll send you Lillian's name. I'll send you the link if I can. It's a little tricky to do it, but I think I can.
I think you could do it. And if you can't, I will help you figure it out. Well, it's so great to talk to you, and we will talk again
I,
soon. That's
okay,
the
take
plan.
care.
All
I'm
right.
leaving the meeting.
All right. Bye.